welcome. My name is Barry Merrick. I'm co-founder and CEO at Ivy and the chapter chair of YPO Metro New York. And it is my absolute pleasure to introduce all of you to Erica Ariel Fox. Erica, welcome. How are you today?
I'm doing great. I'm trying to figure out how to join you. So I've already had my first leadership test of this process.
Welcome. It's so good to see you.
It's great to see you, Barry.
Yeah, so good to be kicking off the week together. It's a beautiful day here in New York City. And we have an incredible group of individuals joining us from around the world, Erica. So thank you for being here with us. For everybody, just a little bit of context that we're going to be talking about Erica's methodology that she's developed, which is called How to Win from Within, which is a breakthrough method for leading, living, and making a lasting change. Erica is the co-founder of Mobius Executive Leadership. She has been on the faculty of Harvard Law School for 25 years, where she teaches negotiation and conflict resolution. She's a trusted advisor to very senior global leaders across the world. And her book, which is also called Winning from Within, was a New York Times bestseller. She's also a senior contributor at Forbes, where she writes a weekly column. And we are super lucky to have her here today for 1 hour to really learn how we can best elevate our lives and the lives of others by leading from within. So Erica, to get us kicked off here, I'd love to ask you, first of all, how did you develop this methodology? What led you to that? And why do you believe it's really important for leaders, organizational leaders, to engage with your methodology?
Great. So first of all, Barry, I'm just so happy to be here. We've tried all these different times to coordinate, to do a thing together for Ivy, and I'm happy that we pulled it off. So stepping back just a little bit to explain how I got to be doing what I'm doing. There's a sort of personal and professional part of the story. There was a period of real turbulence in the world and in my life between 2000 and 2001. I was coming out of the law school. I graduated from Harvard Law School in 1996, 95 actually, and I started teaching in 1996. Most of my world was about conflict resolution and resolving disputes, making deals. I was very, very lucky at that time to be mentored by some of the luminaries in the field: Roger Fisher, William Ury, Bruce Patton, other names you know, Frank Sander, if you're in that space. And I was sort of in a, rising star kind of mode. And then very suddenly my mother passed away, which was a very big shock. She hadn't been sick at all. That was in November. And then in September of 2021, September 9th happened. And my father then passed away a few months later, which was not even a full year since when my mother had passed. So I went very quickly from, a feeling of, I'm in the right place at the right time, and I'm on track to build on the shoulders of giants, to really being forced to step back and ask myself, what is the unique purpose for which I am here? By now, many people can teach Getting to Yes, and many people know these principles, and we have been sharing them with people, but Roger was handpicking a few people and asking, what's going to be your unique contribution to this lineage? And because I had this time off, I started to really look at the ways in which what I had learned in negotiation and problem solving skills and tools were able to help, and the very broad situations where they really fell short and they really were not able to help people resolve any situations around the estate, with my family, with the hospital, with the insurance. So I got very interested in what are we missing? What's the tool we're missing? We have 30 years of literature now on problem-solving tools and practices, but when the stakes are really high and the pressure is on, a lot of these tools fail. So I became very curious about where could we find answers that we could, perhaps from looking deep into the past, for example, to ancient wisdom, to timeless philosophical traditions, could we bring some of that wisdom forward with contemporary best practices and find something that was more holistic and more fit to our times? So that is what I started to do when I came out of that year. I found myself wanting to stand on a bridge between psychological, spiritual, contemplative practices and very practical modern business world people who are getting things done, because I had a foot in both of those worlds. I had Princeton and Harvard in the world, and I had, lifelong spiritual practices and very psychological trainings. And I felt what I could uniquely do was to put those things together. And I created the Harvard Negotiation Insight Initiative in 2002, which we ran for 5 or 6 years, and tell you that story another day. It's a wonderful story, but it was a living laboratory where we brought many, many experts from disciplines you don't normally put together, like economics and poetry. And it was sort of a slam of traditions looking at what would be the most relevant wisdom to bring in this moment in time in history. And that sort of gave birth to the Winning from Within framework and model. And it felt very new then. Now it feels more like, who's not doing this? It feels like, as far out as it seemed then, is a sort of like, of course, that people should be doing it now.
Excellent. Well, thank you for sharing that very personal origin story of how this came to be. And obviously now your book has become a bestseller and the methodology is embraced by so many people around the world. Share with us, just in a nutshell, if everybody implemented this methodology, what would a life look like? What would society look like? What's that like bigger vision there that we could endeavor towards? Before we dive into the specifics, what's the key vision here?
Well, let me say it this way, that I think you can talk about the field broadly of leadership development, transformation, L&D training, coaching, that whole cells of, executive development. You could break down into self-discovery, self-development, and self-realization. And I think that there are different dynamics of learning and potential internal evolution, depending on which of those paths that you're on. I think at the end of the day, the path of self-realization has to do with understanding your different mind states. So different traditions have called this small mind and big mind. Kabbalists have called this mochen de gadlut and mochen de kadnut. It's sort of a perceiving of what is small and what is big, what we might all today call small-mindedness and big-mindedness. And I think if I would say the overall shift, if we said we look 10 years from now and we had trained thousands and thousands of CEOs, and the entire way that the world of business was led in a sort of ecosystem with all the other parts of society, and we said the people who lead these organizations understand small-mindedness and big-mindedness, and they understand that there's a sacred practice of leadership. It takes conscious intention and practice to be not just efficient, but wise. And that we care about that. We care about results, and we care about how we're being in creating those results. And do we take in our externalities, or do we leave them, for other people to deal with them? I mean, it's a stance, is what I guess I would say, is that people would learn that there are different states of mind that create different choices. And my experience of working with many, many, many executives is something I might say as, look, this sounds lovely. I'm 55 years old. I got another run here before I'm out. You can't teach old dog new tricks. And I want to say to you with 1000% certainty, that is false. That is a lie. That is not true. At every moment in your life, as a leader, as a person who runs a household, you can decide, I want to be slightly wiser. I want to be slightly more compassionate. I want a little bit more insight. And you can have that. And I'm sure you've talked on other programs that neuroplasticity, particularly self-directed neuroplasticity, supports this strongly. So. Excellent.
Well, that's a great vision, not just for our lives, but also for this time that we get to have with you. I love how you said, it's efficient, but also wise. And how do we become wiser, more bigger minded, and better fulfill the sacred duty of leadership, as you called it. So exactly. I'm excited to dive in. Share with us, before we dive into the actual methodology, if you would, what are the biggest mistakes and pitfalls that you see people making? Which were the mistakes you were making? And what do you continue to see these, like the most senior global leaders you work with, no matter how successful, accomplished, and how well things may seem to be going, what are those like constant recurring patterns and themes that you keep seeing? So if you maybe hold up that mirror to us so we can kind of see which ones of those we might be falling into, then we'll switch gears and go into the methodology.
My big headline for that would be just the consistent pitfall we all have of operating on autopilot. Like we're in a certain mode, we know that it works in certain things, and then we just apply it everywhere and fail to notice the places that it doesn't work at all. So an example, you might have a very clear analytical mind, you might understand how to manage risk, how to forecast things, and come home and have your teenage daughter or teenage son brokenhearted because the first love of their life just dumped them and they're crying. And you say, objectively speaking, if you look at all the relationships in your life, in the end, you're not even going to remember this person. Like, you know what? I don't even remember the first person who I dated. So that's a logical, rational thing to say, but to your brokenhearted teenager is probably not the exact right response. And so things like this happen at work every single day, where this is how I think about myself. This is how I identify myself to myself. My spike is in making clear analytical arguments supported by data. That's what I do. And pretty much regardless of what the situation or the person or the constituents need from me, I will do that because that's how I roll. And part of the purpose of winning from within as a learning journey is to say, yes, you can do that. Great. And all those other situations you could be effective in if you were willing to let yourself tap on other strengths that you inherently have, but you're not using them right now. And then that overarching pattern, you could now name 1,000 examples of that very thing.
Exactly. All right, very nice. So the big enemy here is autopilot, like just not being fully aware of like not fully engaging the way we would if we were intentional.
Barry, can I just add one PS to that? Because I love the way that you sort of mirror back. I've seen you do that many times. It's brilliant. What I would want to say that is autopilot, and that you understand that your version of autopilot is who you are. So meaning even if you got out of the trance and you were like, I'm going to do something tonight, you're still going to do it from a rational thinking orientation because it's outside of your awareness that you could do these other things too, because they're also part of you. So you can get off autopilot. You still need to go on a journey to say, I'm not just that one way. I have many different parts of me and they're all important and they're all part of me.
Excellent. Well, I do believe that the conversation we're having right now is going to play a critical role in making that happen. So what I'd love to do, since you just kind of already gave us a call to action around this, like intentionality, not being stuck on autopilot, we've got, I don't know if you, like, there's so many people from literally all around the world dialing in: Canada, Latin America, Europe, Middle East, Africa. So what I'd love for everybody joining us live, but also for the many who are going to be listening to this as a recording subsequently, just take a few seconds, everyone, and just think for yourself, what is your key intention for being here? What is the key challenge you're looking to overcome? What's the big opportunity that you see with this? Think about it just for a few seconds, and just to crystallize it and really commit to it, share that intention, either write it down in front of yourself or share it into the chat window, so that Erica and I can also guide the conversation in accordance to that. And hopefully the gap between your intention and what Erica shares with us, whatever is still a gap, that's what the audience Q&A will be for. We'll have about 15 to 20 minutes at the end to go into that as well. So Erica,
the thing that you're asking is actually a perfect way we can go there in terms of if people write down like some kind of a conflict or challenge, we can do a brief exercise even within the time we have to generate some potentially new insights for people on that problem.
Excellent.
That'd be very cool.
Sounds great. So everybody, you're very welcome now to put that into the chat window, and those listening to the recording, just write it down for yourself. And Erica and I are going to do our best to deliver for you. So Erica, take us in a bird's eye view and share with us, winning from within, what are those 7 key ingredients of this methodology, just at a high level, then we're going to take them in turn.
Okay, so just a one sentence nod to my predecessor and mentor, Roger Fisher. Roger Fisher and Bill Urey, who created Getting to Yes, their tag was essentially, these are the 7 elements that you need to negotiate successfully with other people. Winning from Within, which is sort of the end of a trilogy of those books, are the 7 elements that you need to negotiate successfully with yourself. And interestingly, Bill Urey, who wrote the foreword for Winning from Within, was reflecting, in essence, it's really true, to do the thing between each other. You got to do the thing between yourselves first. So, so it's a map and a method of giving you a useful, user-friendly system to understand who you are and how you can develop in this holistic way. Should I just go through the elements quickly, Barry?
Yeah, just it will be good to have just what those ingredients are so people see the map, and then we'll dive in and start from the top.
Okay, perfect. So the way that I came to design this was from working with a lot of corporate groups and senior executives. So I started looking at archetypes. These are universal traits that show up in many, many places across the world, sort of innate elements of human character. And one of the research sources I used was Joseph Campbell. Some of you may know him. He said that a hero has 1,000 faces. And that was his idea about the vast mind of human beings. I thought that 1,000 faces was quite a lot for busy executives. I was thinking more like a 2 by 2, that would be sort of familiar. So I took 4 of the 1,000 that I thought, after decades of research, were the 4 aspects of self that busy professionals could master and would be a huge lever for increasing their satisfaction and their success. I thought of them as a top team. If you have your own top team, you probably, surround yourself with talent, people who can play each of the roles. I was suggesting you also have an inner top team, which means there are different characters in your mind that is also supported by brain research. Different parts of your brain light up when you're using them. And that these parts of you are an inner top team. So if you think of a top team as having a CEO, a CFO, a COO, and a CHRO, I just backed off that a little bit from purely corporate titles to what I was calling more archetypal identities, because they're more familiar to a lot of people. So number 1, in your inner life, you have a dreamer who has some of the same skills, potentially as a CEO, focuses on possibilities, strategy, looks to the future. You have a thinker who's very rational, that you use to analyze data, watch risk. The third internal character, which is like now your CHRO, your inner lover, who does the kinds of things you think they would do. They maintain and recruit talent, they develop, they hire and fire, and they, specifically in an HR role, you start to get some of those skills in your own executive repertoire. The fourth one is the warrior, and the warrior is about getting things done. So to repeat those, the dreamer, thinker, lover, and warrior. And I do explain more when I'm teaching that these are meant in an archetypal sense. These are sort of universal characters. So people, when they're learning them, can very quickly feel into what does that mean? What's the, we'll practice this later. What's the mindset or mind view of each of these characters? And that enables them and will enable you to apply them easily. So that's your inner top team. I'll just add that you have a little board of directors, 3 board of directors I call the transformers, and they are really looking out, supervising and orchestrating those big 4. We may not get to all of that today, but they are called the lookout, the captain, and the voyager.
Okay, excellent. Very excited to dive straight in here. So Let's start with the dreamer. Okay, so you said this is in your inner team. This is kind of like the CEO. It's interesting that you related that role to the CEO one and not the thinker one, the one that's like analyzing data and watching risk. So share with us how
CEO one can also be a little related to the entrepreneur.
Mhm.
The one who has like the vision and the audacity to go for it and like isn't super stuck on running the numbers. Yeah, going for the dream as opposed to what's realistic.
So would you say like all these characteristics, these are just like different sides of who we are, or so these are just different elements of what constitute us, and that at different times are different parts in charge, and we switch. Okay, so within that context, tell us about, more specifically, not just more about the dreamer, but how do we best empower the dreamer to really elevate our lives and lead in the best way possible? And what do we need to avoid, and what do we need to do more of?
So Barry, I'm tempted to tell you a 1-minute image that comes from Carl Jung, but you have to tell me skip it or go for it, just to explain what you just asked. I could easily skip it.
Go for it.
So I'm just following on what you said, but one of the things that Carl Jung used to say, it's an image that has stayed with me, is that every human being is born into a mansion. And in the mansion, it has grand halls and salons and sleeping quarters and guest quarters. And then little by little, as we live our lives, we decide, yeah, that room, I don't really like what's in that room. I close the door and I lock it. And then we have some other life experiences. We say, we don't love that room either, so we're just gonna like lock it. And over the course of our life, we wake up at some point thinking, hey, I live in like kind of a crummy 1-bedroom apartment. All the doors around me are locked. And his belief is that's like a kind of way that we do live our lives. Like the mansion is still there, and it's our journey in a safe and appropriate way to start, looking, are there some doors that actually we could open safely? And maybe there's some kernels of our most powerful leadership capabilities stuck behind these doors. So he talked about the limiting energy of limiting beliefs that makes us think we should keep those doors locked, and then the liberating energy that we can bring now, as we want to develop as leaders, to just sort of release and free up some of that life force.
Yeah, beautiful analogy. I'm glad you shared that one. So share with us now the role of the dreamer within this, and exactly how starting tomorrow, starting next week, we can better use the dreamer aspect of our being, and what do we need to do more and what do we need to do less of?
Yeah. So the dreamer is really about possibility, and the dreamer fuels by creativity and imagination, and is not really constrained by whether something is very practical. And there's a million ways you could start practicing. I'm just going to shoot out a couple of them. One is, if you find yourself trying to grapple with a problem, a conflict, some kind of a challenge, and you're just going around and around thinking, well, we could do that, but that wouldn't work. We've tried that before. If you give yourself a chance, just tap into your dreamer for a minute. And in order to do that, you might want to picture someone in your life who you think a very strong dreamer, very optimistic, fueled by hope. And you might ask yourself, if I were that person, who had a lot of hope, if I were that person, and I would ask myself, what is the highest possibility of an outcome for this situation? Forget if it's realistic, forget that is unlikely, but just ask myself, if I could wave a magic wand and somehow this would have a beautiful resolution, what can I even imagine that resolution could be? And sit, write it down, come back to it an hour later and ask yourself, is there anything that you could say or do, or stop saying and stop doing, that would help this situation and your role in it start moving one step closer? Because now you're working towards a dreamer's resolution, as opposed to, protecting yourself against the devastating outcome. And it just, the momentum will help start putting you towards a potentially positive outcome.
Excellent. So we got to imagine our, that somebody that we think would deal with this in the most dreamer, positive, optimistic way. And then what the solution could look like and what are the immediate things we can do to get there. Share with us what kills a dreamer, what's the worst thing we can do, to kind of like counter the power of the dreamer within us.
Okay, well, I will say each of these four, let me just quickly add, each of the four, dreamer, thinker, lover, warrior, most people, extensive research that I've done show, most people identify with one or two of them. They have one they're sort of neutral on, and one they pretty much abandoned a long time ago. So on a sort of like an agenda of learning, it's helpful to figure out where are the one or two that are weakest that I could start to bring back into my leadership. And the ones that are strong, have they become so strong that now there's no room for these guys? So there has to be kind of a rebalancing, even though we're talking about like what could each one do independently. I think it's important just for people to understand part of the way you get to a higher level of leadership excellence and mastery is you start renegotiating with them, with each other, even if we don't get there today. So the question was, where's the dreamer fall short? Was that the question?
Well, no, just like you gave us a good exercise for making sure that, like enabling the dreamer to, flourish. What are the things that really block a dreamer? What are like the pitfalls where people maybe, for those who are neglecting the dreamer, what are those things and what should we avoid?
I think, one of the biggest ones is that the dreamer who is so excited and so inspired and on fire for the dream fails to notice that they have not enlisted followers. So they're off charging forward, to the dream, and many other members of their team are not following. And a way you can use this tool, rather than like going to each person and saying, why aren't you engaged? Which, by the way, they may or may not tell you, given office politics. You can actually write down, I don't even think you need to name anybody. Just write down on a piece of paper a little figure that represents like a lover, a thinker, and a warrior. And again, you got to use your imagination here, right? This is not just a set of ideas, it's a set of practices. But you can say, okay, in the privacy of your own office, you could do this literally in 7 minutes. Here's my dream, and I want to know, why are you guys not coming for the ride? And what do you need from me to join my vision? And then you have to listen, and you'd be surprised what these inner characters might say, right? The inner lover might say, I don't feel invested or included. I don't feel you care if I'm on this team. And now you have an insight. I have to go make a connection. Maybe the warrior says, I've seen no project plan. I've seen no budget. I don't know what resources it needs. This person can't follow my dream until I give this information, right? I'm asking from a thinker perspective, why is this thinker not coming along for the ride? Well, the thinker knows that this has been tried 3 times before and failed 3 times. So can I bring like some kind of model to demonstrate to that guy or woman, here's the difference between then and now, and here's why this one will succeed, so that that person is convinced that it's reasonable to try. And to say again, I didn't now have 15-minute conversations with 3 different people. I've just understood a little how each of the ones work. And I say, these people are not coming along, why not? You get this tiny insight, and then you say, okay. By itself, it generates little action steps that I can take. And, by the afternoon, I might think like, hey, everybody's getting on board.
Okay, excellent. Very good. So 7 minutes to just reflect, how do I get the other aspects of my being to participate in this, and what's standing in the way?
Does that make sense, Barry?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's continue with the thinker. Share with us, how do we unleash the thinker within us? How do we best empower it to guide us on our journey?
Well, here I am a little bit biased because that's what I've been working with thousands of senior executives. And I will say that thinkers often need more help tuning down the volume than they do tuning up the volume. We can talk more about that, but you'll see more people who need help accessing their inner dreamer than accessing their inner thinker. just, I think in general, business rewards come a lot from that capability. So my advice to people is just start to notice how confident you are, how often that you are correct. Broadly called overconfidence bias. And if you catch yourself feeling quite confident that you're correct and just sort of waiting for other people to, talk at the meeting to come around or not, so you can say, I've heard all your input, I still think what I thought at the beginning. Challenge yourself to assume that you are missing something important, because you probably are. People are looking at this from very different contexts. They might have information you don't have. They could possibly be smarter than you about this topic. I know that's heretical, but a way to build a better relationship with your thinker is to stop assuming that it is completely the fastest, the brightest, the most clever, the most accurate mind in the room all the time. And your thinker will be much more skilled if you practice. Somebody in here has got to have a compelling view, and I am honestly going to open my mind to consider on the merits if it adds something to my understanding.
All right, excellent. So this is all about really the prompt that you want to give all of us when it comes to the thinker is just like always challenge yourself to see, okay, what could I be missing? What might be not included in my thinker hat? Okay, excellent.
I mean, let me say, Barry, just to say, because all the flips, and I'll say this very quickly, you might have the flip side thinker issue, which is that you always doubt your thinker. You always wonder if you're wrong. Maybe you feel intimidated. And so for that person, I would say, if you think you have an opinion, take a leap of faith that you're right. Probably the costs are not a disaster if you're not. Put your thoughts out there. Like, you don't have to constantly hold back because you're not confident in your thinking. I see that problem less, but I want to say each of these could go either way. You could need to pick it up a little or lower it down a little.
Okay, excellent. Thank you for that. Now let's go to the lover. This of all the ones you mentioned seemed to me like the hardest to properly visualize. What do you mean, like, the CHRO, right? Like the person who is maintaining talent and so forth. Share with us, how do we best get the most out of the lover part of our character?
Well, I want to say something general, but just need 1 minute to say something specific. My experience of working with CEOs during COVID is that the coin has dropped about the inner lover so profoundly that people's polite conversations, like, hey, how are you? Oh, good, how are you? That people would start a meeting, that when COVID hit, these conversations became genuine. How are you? Like, I care. I want to know how you are. Are people sharing fear, didn't know where their children were, didn't know what was happening with their parents? I mean, that there was a human connection. There was a human barrier that broke down, that brought emotional connectivity into the workplace. We don't know yet if that will sustain, but I just want to point out that humans didn't need to learn how to care about each other. When the situation arose, human caring was there. It's just something that we're not familiar with in like day-to-day business. So with that said, your question about the lover was?
Yeah, I mean, the question is essentially, how do we, just like we talked about the dreamer and the thinker, some prompts to bring the best out of them and like downplay their, like, the negative aspects. How do we unleash the inner lover, and how do we help stop it from going out of control?
Yeah. So two sides of this, as always. One, lover dynamic that I see a lot of senior business people grapple with, specifically if they're very used to operating with high thinker, high warrior, is it's really tough to take the emotions of other people seriously. Because at this moment, that the way they're operating, they're not feeling lots of emotions in their way. And so it's very easy to write someone off like, this person is hysterical, this person is high maintenance, and you're kind of just waiting for the person to stop expressing their feelings. That is a deflated, I dare say, dysfunctional inner lover. So when you find yourself thinking, Like, can she let this go, please? Or like, can he just, finish this speech? When you find yourself with that mindset, which is a deflated lover mindset, you might ask yourself, wait a minute, what if what this person is telling us, what if this feeling, what if this emotion is the most important thing happening at this meeting? Maybe this person's hurting is expressing something to our group that we keep not resolving. So this team member keeps getting louder and louder and more dramatic, but actually by validating, meaning we take it seriously, the message, we start to learn something, and our team becomes more emotionally intelligent. So I would look for the habit of dismissing or invalidating the merit of emotion, because the bar to share how you feel at work is so high. If somebody's breaking through that bar, there's probably a decent reason.
All right, excellent. So whenever we're diminishing something, that's where we need to catch ourselves and see, okay, let's go fully empathize and see what might be going on.
Yeah, so I have to give you the flip side. I know these flip sides are kind of getting, but just to say, if you are a person who has brings a lot of drama into the workplace, then you have an enormous amount of need to digest your feelings and share your personal stories and have people being your support system at work. That person has an inflated lover and needs to learn self-regulation and needs to learn how to manage and monitor, how much and when and with whom is it appropriate to relate to emotions in the workplace. This is not at all to say any feeling anyone ever has, we should talk about that. No, that's not true at all. We need to have appropriate room, which isn't 0, but on a scale of 100 is also probably not 100. So there's a, there's a center in all these things.
Excellent. All right. So we need to be careful also not over concerning ourselves to the point where it incapacitates our other abilities to operate. Okay. So last one out of the 4 main inner characters, the warrior, the person getting things done. Share with us, how do we get the most out of the warrior, and what are the pitfalls around the warrior aspect of our persona that we may want to keep under control?
So the pitfall, which I think of almost as well-intentioned, I think of it almost like a blind spot pitfall. People move into a mindset and behavior that is, I think, quite more aggressive than they realize. I think people who operate on overdrive warrior, in addition to burning themselves out and also other externalities to that behavioral profile, are in the mindset that we all want this result, we all want it together. Nothing is more important to us. And they just are so focused on that result that the dimension of the people who are working with them, the dimension of the culture of how they're going to generate this result, it becomes very dark and can be very aggressive. And what my experience has been in many, many, many executives is having people come, doing a session where someone comes and says, I don't really see this, and supporting, 3 or 4 different either people who have left, peers, direct reports, saying, honestly, let me show you an example. I felt very intimidated. So to help those people realize in those moments, it's not just that you're working hard. You need to find a place of assertiveness. You should assert, you shouldn't keep quiet, but there's an assertiveness, which is a behavior of accountability, of holding a boundary without aggressing on someone and perhaps leaving them fearful, which is not okay. So there's a balanced and centered warrior, just like there's a balanced and centered of all of the big 4. The flip side, I think, is and sometimes earlier in someone's career, but not necessarily, which is, the warrior is about protection and correction. So the centered warrior can say, whoa, I don't agree with that. Somebody who has their warrior running very low finds it hard to say no, finds it hard to set a boundary. I can think of many pre-COVID examples of people saying oh, it's my daughter's birthday and my boss just asked me to go to Singapore and it's crazy. I have to be there for 1 hour to sign a document. And I said, what did he say? When you told him about the birthday, he said, well, The real question is, what did my wife say when I told her I had to go to Singapore? So, and he regretted that, but it's not, it takes a skill and a mindset to be able to say, I have a healthy enough grounded warrior, which is about taking choices, setting limits, telling a hard truth, that I can do that and feel good about my decision in the end. And I hope you can see from all of these examples, any one of them can be in balance or out of balance, and something, maybe get to in another conversation is that they're interrelated with each other, right? They're not all independent of each other. So as you start to learn and grow with it, you have a seesaw like this. As you start to bring this down, this one also comes up. So it's a system that also has some self-balancing, innate health in it. It's trying to get to balance.
Excellent. Thank you, Erica. Before we dive into the audience Q&A here, just in a couple of final minutes, could you share with us the three people on the board of directors, as you called it? So the Lookout, Captain, and the Voyager. Please share with us again, when it comes to these three, what are the best ways to really leverage them? And how do we also make sure that they don't get in the way either?
Yeah, okay. So in brief, the Lookout is on the lookout for how your big four are operating in you. So it's a part of you that is designed to watch your inner life, and it can see, the warrior is now on steroids being aggressive. Or it can see your daughter's crying and you're lecturing her about the statistical likelihood of first loves becoming important in life. Your Lookout sees what you're doing and passes that observation to the Captain, which is a part of your mind that is designed for choice. I do want to just say it's not the part of your mind that is designed to think through a decision and think through the right answer. That is your thinker. But your Captain makes wise choices by getting input from each of the four. And the last one is the Voyager. The Voyager has to do with allowing your sense of who you are and who you can become to be a developing and evolving path of your story over the course of your life. And I'll share a very quick story with you, Barry. Before I published my book, what I would now lovingly like to call my first book, give me time. Before I published my first book, I was out with a publisher in Germany, and he was referring to me as the author and saying like, oh, you and some of the other authors. And I literally had to keep myself from laughing. Like, okay, I'm like a play author. I'm not really an author. That was kind of fun. But years later, I have a New York Times bestselling book. I've been to a lot of book conferences. I've signed my name on books. It's not funny to me. If someone says I'm a New York Times bestselling author, I've integrated that in my identity. I think like, yes, I am. Great. And what do you do? And so that's part of what the Voyager chapters are about. Is like something, maybe you dreamed of being a CEO, but you've been a CFO, and now suddenly you're in the CEO role, but you don't instantaneously feel like, oh great, now I feel like a CEO. Probably you still feel like a lot of the roles that you played, the functions you provided as a CFO, you're still gonna incline to that because it's a Voyager process, which can be slow or fast, to wrap your head around like, no, now I'm in a new identity. I'm in a new situation. This has been a chapter of my Voyager journey. And what's needed and called for from me in my leadership and in my life is now going to be new.
Excellent. And final question, just to bring this all together, then we're jumping into the audience Q&A. Do you recommend, how do you recommend people stay on top of all of this, right? So is it just a matter of carving out a few minutes daily or once a week, having a strategic review of where everyone is? Do people have a checklist on a piece of paper where you have the 7 characters and you go through them? How do you recommend practically having this kind of framework top of mind? Because obviously it's very relevant, inspiring, valuable when we're focused on it.
Right.
But when you have a bad moment or something goes off, how do you keep coming back to this framework in a way that doesn't just require you to remember to do it, but rather becomes a matter of course?
Right. So I'm not one for pitching products, but I'll give you some short answers to that. First, you can go to my website and it has like all sorts of potential free resources. So I recommend that. There are also, I guess I would say, offerings that we have that can teach companies, businesses, large groups of partners and executives, some of these concepts, but we also have tools that are available to individuals who are interested in it. We have a little toolbox you can buy and do that alongside a book. We're going to have e-learning programs that you can, on demand, watch them on your home. Those are going to be coming out next year. So we're increasingly trying to make things available for the public. So for someone who says, I just want to put my toe in the water and learn a little, I think one of our goals for 2021 is to have more, very low touch, bunch of videos, some questionnaire, because I'm starting to get more and more of that question. If I'm not going to go to a long workshop, how can I learn this? And at the same time, we're also, making a broader range of offerings for people who do want in their business environment to take their leadership to the next level.
Excellent. But in the meantime, would you say like a really simple one is just even having a piece of paper that just even has the 7 characters, and you just like maybe look at it and work through it.
Okay. If you go to my website, and by the way, I'm launching a new website in 2 weeks, so you might wait. But if you go to resources, these are all free. You can download a wallet card, and it is exactly what Barry is saying. It's a little wallet card, and it has the little icons for the 7 characters, and it has like a little 1-sentence reminder. You can carry it in your wallet. You can put whatever you want, and it is free. And of course, people can also follow me on Twitter, follow me on LinkedIn. I post weekly. These are also free. Of course, I do a column in Forbes. If you want to just keep following the ideas and how I'm thinking about them, please, find me on Twitter, find me on LinkedIn. And, and if anyone wants to give any inputs about ways they would like to connect or ways they'd like to be part of this, I really think this is a movement that is, is underway, but is going to really, take off in the next decade. So ways that people want to participate, drop me a note, we can be in touch.
Excellent. Thank you, Erica. All right, diving in now to the questions. First one is from George Retzos, who asks and says, Erica mentioned that most leaders have 1 or 2 characteristics, dreamer, thinker, lover, warrior. I'm curious, in her research, which are the 2 most common and likely most important characteristics that most successful leaders have?
So is the question assuming the most common are the ones to be most successful?
Potentially.
So here's what I would say. Very typically, people identify themselves as high thinker, high warrior. These are things that I think historically business organizations have rewarded, and results matter. Analytical horsepower matters. In these moments, I think even from when Daniel Pink's book came out, like right brainers will rule the world, that was a long time ago. I think there's been an appreciation that the intelligence of the right brain, which works more in story than in numbers, more in symbols than PowerPoint slides, more likely to make an emotional connection with an audience than give an Excel spreadsheet, that there's been a very significant shift, or at least a pull for the integration of what we can call left and right brain intelligence. So left brain intelligence, which is the thinker warrior, have a very good track record of leading to success. And we are at a tipping point now where the best leaders simply cannot lead big companies, lead the world without integrating dreamer and lover. They just can't. They say it themselves. I don't have to tell it to them. They know that. They come to me saying, can you help me? Because thinker, warrior on its own without dreamer and lover, just gets stuck and does things for the wrong reasons at the wrong time with the wrong people for the wrong purpose. And it is not a pretty scene.
Thank you for that, Erica. This is a great answer. So next one here is somewhat related from Donna Linwand. She asks and says, I've heard a lot about employers now valuing high EQ. How do you ramp up your inner lover to be more empathetic leader? So what are some specific additional practices that you can recommend for us?
So just to review the one I did say, which was take people's feelings more seriously. But I think there's a lot of little exercises, on all of these things, the different developmental practices, if you think about them on a dial from 0 to 10, you can do any of these exercises at a 1 or at a 3 or at a 5, and you don't have to start the exercise at a 10. Here's a really simple thing, and probably people do, and I would just add it like with a little kick. So maybe people say to you, make sure to express appreciation, make sure to express gratitude to people. I would only add to that, if you're doing it as a lover practice, to be more empathic. Don't just simply walk by someone's desk and say, hey, great to see you, hope vacation was good. Pause and ask yourself, can I think of an example or a story when this person was specifically helpful to me, and in what way? So it's not just like, thanks, I appreciate you, but it's like, thank you so much for getting that deck done, making sure it got to the printer, because in the end, the thing would have fallen apart without you. And I know you might see this goes unnoticed, but you saved me and we got that account. And like, I just so appreciate your loyalty and commitment. Like, practice appreciation in a way that is very, very concrete. And the impact of that is much, much, much higher. And the third one, of course, would be, try to not stuff your own feelings. If you're having a feeling, like experiment with in a very small or safe way, experiment with it. I do want to share one tiny example, Barry, if I can, was about a very senior consultant working with a client, and was saying he felt he was in a really disconnected space with this client. He was finding it difficult to connect with him. They were arguing over solutions for the business problem. And at some point he was with dinner with him, and he looked at him and he just said, John, how are you feeling? And that conversation then became a 2.5 hour heart-to-heart, intimate, bonding, sharing conversation that would have literally never happened, but for the simple question, how are you feeling? So it's sometimes just simpler than we think it is to bring emotional intelligence into the conversation. And it had a very direct business impact because the relationship got so much closer.
Excellent. So expressing your feelings more openly, really inquiring into the other's feelings, like asking in a way that really enables them to share. And then finally, when you're sharing gratitude, doing it in a way that really says, okay, I'm thankful for this, and this is why I'm thankful for it, so that the person who did the thing can fully appreciate, what the impact it made on you specifically. Thank you, Erica. All right, next one is from Steve Boyd. He says, we're working with a very high-performing company. How do you recommend taking a measure of the leadership capacity and learning readiness to design your whole systems approach to learning and development?
This, I would say, is, if you want to really take it seriously, then you're talking about, formal leadership assessments. And I would say that's outside of the sweet spot of the kind of stuff that I do. And I think that is very, very valuable to do. There are much simpler, less, scientifically validated, simple tools that we have. An online quiz you can take. We have online available free discussion questions that you can have with your team that lead you to reflect on some of the dynamics, with some exercises you can do as a team. I think it is helpful to map the different strengths and also how you're compensating for each other on the team. But in fairness, this is not a rigorous assessment, which I know there are many that are very fine tools.
Excellent. So
Barry, I feel we're leaving everyone with this example they chose. And we didn't tell them what to do with it.
Which one?
Well, it will take me only 1 minute to say this.
Yeah, go ahead.
It seemed, if I understood correctly, that we invited people early on to think of a problem that they could then sort of apply this to. Do you think that's what we said?
Yeah, I think everybody.
Or you feel like we've answered it already?
No, I encourage everybody to have their key intentions, so that as they're listening to you, they can really kind of apply it to their own situation, like what they came here for. So yeah. Hopefully everybody was doing that as they went along.
Anyway, but so I just wanted to invite you that you could do the same process with yourself. If you take this business question or challenge and you try to tap into yourself, either by, thinking of someone in your life that represents that, or someone that you remember who isn't in your life now, but you knew them 30 years ago. If you were to ask for the for the dreamer, thinker, lover, and warrior, best advice to you, if you're here in the middle on that dilemma, you will get some kind of interesting insight that might give you traction to go forward in a different way. It's a very practical exercise. You can do it quickly. And my experience is that it really gives people a sense of, wow, I got, my handles around that problem in a really new, interesting way.
Excellent. One, this kind of was coming up right now in your second last answer, where you actually started talking about a team balancing each other out, depending on which characteristics are shining through more or less. Share with us from a leadership perspective, how to actually best implement this kind of a system as a team. Like, do you actually, can you have a team-wide discussion on like, hey, what are your characteristics? Where are you struggling? Is that a healthy exercise? And then how do you bring it, that's just more in a vacuum if you have some time and you carve out time to do that. And then when it's crisis mode or really important critical stuff happening, how do you bring in these characters without people feeling like you're talking about some esoteric stuff when like you have a very real problem to deal with? Like, what have you found to be the best way to integrate this? If it's a leader who really believes in this framework,
yes,
how do you bring it to life?
So this might be a slightly counterintuitive answer. Obviously, if you're trying to put a top team together, then you're going to want to reach around for the best top talent. Maybe you bring some people from your former organization, you put this team around you. My advice to the most senior leaders is that you do not want to outsource one of your 4 core aspects of leadership intelligence to someone else. So the core capacity for dreamer, thinker, lover, and warrior, I don't want you to go, well, tap that person, he's good for that, or she's good for that. No, I think you want to say, I am perfectly capable of bringing to bear all the best of a top team in me, A, and B, I want to have a quality of conversation and self-awareness in our group. And we can get that in lots of ways. Read the book, have a conversation, have a facilitated day-long virtual retreat. I mean, there's all the ways that but how to bring learning modalities into organizations. High performing teams, 100% use winning from within as like a little self profile, a little self, where our strengths, where, in what way, people often ask, in what way is my strength, Barry, keeping you from, contributing that part of yourself because I'm taking up all the room, it's actually can be not a charged conversation. It could be playful, and changing up those dynamics is a very big lever for accelerating change in a team.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Erica. One final question here from an anonymous attendee, and I'd like to use this as a way for you to help us also wrap up this, what's been an incredibly valuable conversation. Someone asked, how do you know when you're doing well, when your inner top team is well balanced? So share with us any final word of wisdom or call to action as it relates to that, like to achieving that balance, anything you want to leave us with. And before that, you can also share anything we can do to best support you, your endeavors, causes you care about, or latest projects. We'd love to hear about that as well.
Okay, here's what I would say. Your inner top team is working well when you can muster compassion for yourself because your inner top team is not working well. That's how you know it's working well. So when things are not working well, the problem isn't only that it's not working, it's that on top of that, we can be very, very mean to ourselves about failure of, someone else could have done it. How could that have happened? This happens to men and women, by the way. And the inner team isn't going to work perfectly all the time. So yes, we can talk about, how do you tell? But for me, the most important thing is to be able to step back and have a perspective of, you're probably doing the best you can, and you probably succeed a lot of the time, and some of the times you don't. And the reason that happens is that if you're a human being, and none of us do things right all the time. I know that's very easy to say, but I think it is very important if you're going to be on a learning journey of this depth, to keep reminding yourself, like, I could keep doing what I already know I do well, and I wouldn't feel frustrated, but what kind of life is that? I mean, the Voyager perspective assumes that we all want to grow and develop, and we have an innate drive to grow and develop. So we don't want to be successful all the time. We want to be working and growing all the time. And sometimes you're going to make a mistake. It's okay.
So the power of compassion. One thing that didn't come up is like fun and joy. Like which character supplies that, or which part of our personality? Like clearly compassion is one of the overarching things we need to have for ourselves. But what about like the enjoying of the journey? Where does that come in?
I really love you for asking that. Joy is in the dreamer quadrant, because joy also comes from play, from imagination, from just being free of constraint, right? It's fun. Each of the four has its own emotional gateway, and I'm looking at the time, but joy is the emotional gateway to the dreamer.
Perfect. Well, Erica, this was so powerful. Thank you so much for
Really
sharing so deeply and so in such an inspiring way these 7 key areas that we can all be reflecting on a lot more. I really appreciate it and look forward to continuing our conversation. Thank you for being here.
Barry, thank you so much. Hope to
pleasure.
see many of you in the future.
Absolutely, Erica. All the best. Have a great week ahead. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. See you all again soon. Take care.
Ciao, everybody.
Bye.